Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you was never meant to be heard. It is not folklore, it is not cautionary tale, it is inheritance written in blood. Imagine this. A father, sitting in a rusted car, cigarette smoke hanging in the stale air. He points through the windshield to the stone towers of Oregon State Penitentiary, the razor wire glinting like a crown of thorns in the sun. His sons sit in silence in the back seat. He doesn't warn them, he doesn't plead with them. He tells them, with the calmness of prophecy, "Look carefully, boys. This is your home one day." For most families, prison is a nightmare. For the Bogles, it was destiny. Over 4 generations, as many as 70 members of this cursed bloodline would fill the courtrooms and prison cells of America, arrest slips and mugshots stacking like chapters in a Bible of damnation. Their crimes began small, like whispers in the dark, petty theft, shoplifting, schoolyard intimidation. But as the curse deepened, those whispers became screams, burglary, assault, even murder. Each act passed down like a family heirloom, each crime an inheritance carved into the soul of the next generation. But listen carefully, this is not just the story of one violent family. This is not just about Oregon in the 1970s. What you are hearing now is a case study in how corruption is taught like arithmetic, how reputation itself becomes a prison sentence, how entire bloodlines are chained to legacies of crime and decay, and deeper still, how institutions, governments, and entire systems watch it unfold, quietly feeding off it, because some curses are not accidents, some curses are engineered. The Bogles were not wealthy, they were not powerful, they were not masterminds running empires from skyscrapers, they were pawns. Yet in their chaos, in their destruction, they reveal something far more dangerous, that a family can be turned into a weapon against itself, and that society, instead of saving them, will use their downfall as fuel for control. You see, the walls of the Oregon State Penitentiary weren't just concrete, they were ritual, built by convict labor in the 19th century, expanded across decades, fed by a stream of bodies whose names dissolved into numbers, into records, into statistics. That building was not just a prison, it was a monument, a temple to captivity. And when Dale Vincent Rooster Bogle pointed his sons toward it, he wasn't warning them, he was inducting them into a religion older than they knew. A religion of chains, of obedience, of destruction disguised as destiny. The Bogle curse begins here, in silence, in prophecy, in the parking lot of Salem. The children do not laugh, they do not cry, they do not argue. They simply stare through glass at the building that waits for them. Already, they have been initiated. Already, the curse has teeth in their blood. Already, the prophecy is binding itself around their lives like barbed wire. Because here's the truth nobody told you. Curses don't just happen. They're planted. And once planted, they are watered by trauma, fertilized by institutions, and harvested by the systems of control that thrive on broken men. Think of it. A family is supposed to be shelter, to be protection, to be a wall between a child and the world's hunger. But in the Bogle home, the father was not a shield. He was an architect of decay. Rooster taught his sons not to fear prison, but to admire it, not to avoid theft, but to master it, not to resist authority, but to despise it. He spoke with the weight of Scripture, but his gospel was bondage. He conditioned them to see freedom as temporary and confinement as inevitable. This is not just dysfunction. This is programming, a cycle designed to consume. And you need to understand, the Bogles were not one in this. They were simply one of the most extreme, one of the most obvious. Behind them stand hundreds of families, thousands of men, millions of lives bound to invisible curses, addiction, crime, poverty, violence. Patterns that repeat, generation after generation, as if someone is pulling the strings from above. And here's the darkest part. When Rooster pointed to those prison walls, he wasn't lying. He wasn't wrong. The prophecy came true. His sons, his brothers, his cousins, one after another, they filled the cells, not by chance, not by mistake, but because the curse had already been written into their bloodline. Now ask yourself, how deep does this go? How much of your life, of your choices, of your family's story is truly yours? How much has been written before you were even born? The Bogles believed prison was their inheritance. But inheritance is not just money, not just land, not just names. Inheritance is memory. It is trauma. It is belief. And belief, when forced on a child, becomes law. So tonight, we will trace the Bogle dynasty from their carnival roots in the South to the penitentiary towers of Oregon. But we will not stop at the surface. We will go deeper. We will ask, when crime itself becomes a family tradition, when captivity is passed down like a surname, when corruption infects not just the individual but the bloodline itself, can the curse ever be broken? Understand, this is not a bedtime story. This is dangerous knowledge. Because once you see how the Bogles were shaped, how their curse was sculpted not just by their father, but by the very institutions around them, you will never look at your own family the same way again. You will see patterns where once you saw accidents. You will see chains where once you saw choices. And once you see them, you cannot unsee them. The descent begins now. You need to understand something about Dale Vincent Rooster Bogle. He wasn't just a petty criminal. He wasn't just a father gone wrong. He was an architect of destiny, warping the lives of his sons with the precision of a sculptor until their very identities bent toward crime. He did not teach them lessons. He performed them. He told stories of burglary like other fathers tell fairy tales. He issued threats as jokes so his children would laugh as they absorbed their fear. And when he pointed toward the penitentiary, he wasn't making a prediction. He was binding them like a priest invoking a curse over his own lineage. To outsiders, Rooster was small, a thief, a repeat offender, a man with a crooked smile and a record too thick for his age. But inside his home, he was everything. He was the law, the teacher, the god of their little world. And he ruled with a paradoxical hand, charismatic enough to inspire loyalty, cruel enough to ensure obedience. His kingdom was not a penitentiary, not yet. His kingdom was a rented house in Salem, Oregon, where the kitchen table was littered with cigarette ash, beer bottles, and burglary tools. That table was not a place for meals. It was an altar, and every day his children gathered at it to receive their catechism in crime. Do you see the pattern now? For most families, mealtime is nourishment, laughter, storytelling. For the Bogles, mealtime was indoctrination. Rooster would point to a neighbor's home or a parked car down the street and explain how to break into it, which locks gave way, which windows cracked easiest, which excuses worked when the police came knocking. He gave them problems to solve the way a teacher assigns homework. Only this homework was burglary, deception, intimidation. His children did not learn math. They learned manipulation. They did not learn history. They learned how to rewrite it with lies. They did not learn morality. They learned that control was the only truth. And control was everything to Rooster. He ridiculed his sons when they stumbled through a lie, mocked them until they repeated it with confidence, until deception rolled from their tongues as smoothly as breath. When they succeeded, he praised them, not for honesty, but for mastery of the mask. He taught them that trust was weakness, and loyalty meant obedience only to him. Authority beyond his word did not exist. Police were enemies. Outsiders were prey. Teachers were obstacles. Every rule was rewritten. Every boundary bent until crime was not rebellion, it was family tradition. But there was a darker dimension, one that went beyond theft and burglary. Rooster blurred the line between love and control, between loyalty and violation. He twisted intimacy into obedience, demanding submission from his sons in ways that scarred them far deeper than arrests ever could. He made humiliation into ritual, perversion into proof of allegiance. By corrupting the very bond between father and child, he ensured no outside authority could ever rival his control. This was not just crime. This was psychological warfare. A closed circuit of dominance that trapped his children in a world where even their bodies were weapons and bargaining chips. The home itself became a school with no graduation. Every corner carried the weight of his lessons. Every night was a rehearsal. Every mistake was corrected with cruelty until obedience was reflex. In this house, stealing from a store wasn't crime. It was family bonding. Standing up to a teacher wasn't rebellion. It was practice in intimidation. Even play was consumed. Childhood dares became surveillance drills. Walking down the street became reconnaissance. His children were soldiers in a private war they never agreed to fight. And society? Society played its role, just as surely as Rooster did. Neighbors whispered about the family. Teachers filed reports about truancy, theft, disruption. And police officers scribbled the surname Bogle in their notes, knowing it meant trouble. But nothing changed. No intervention came. Because the Bogles fit too neatly into the machinery of the state. They were repeat offenders, easy arrests, predictable recidivists. They fed the system that consumed them. The penitentiary doors were built for men like them. Their name became shorthand for crime long before the acts were committed. Reputation itself became prophecy, and this is where the curse tightens its grip. Understand, curses do not require magic. They require memory. They require repetition. Trauma, passed down like inheritance, becomes indistinguishable from blood. By the time Rooster's sons reached adolescence, crime was not deviance. It was identity. It was their surname. Their initiation was marked not by birthdays, but by mugshots. Childhood milestones were measured not in school certificates, but in arrest slips. And here's the part you were never supposed to see. The Bogle curse is not unique. It is not anomaly. It is blueprint, a demonstration of how a family can be dismantled and reassembled into a weapon against itself. Think about it. Strip away the details and you see the pattern everywhere. Addiction passed from father to son. Poverty repeating across generations. Abuse concealed until the children become abusers themselves. Each cycle, each curse, feeding the same system of control that profits from broken men. The Bogles are simply the clearest example because they did not hide. Their crimes were public, their arrests recorded, their name whispered like a warning across Salem. But in their destruction lies a map of something bigger, a truth hidden in plain sight, that entire bloodlines can be cursed, not by accident but by design. So let me ask you, what curses run in your bloodline? What patterns have been handed to you like invisible shackles? Were you told, as a child, who you would become before you even had a choice? Did your family draw the map of your life in reverse, leading you not toward freedom, but toward confinement? The Bogles were chained to a prophecy, but listen carefully, so are you. And if you've stayed with me this far, you already feel it. The descent is real. The rabbit hole has opened, but we're only at the threshold, because the curse doesn't end here. It stretches back further, into carnival grounds, into dusty southern roads, into the roots of a bloodline that learned crime not as rebellion, but as culture. And when you see where it truly began, you'll understand why the curse was never theirs alone. It belongs to the world we live in. Every curse begins somewhere. It doesn't explode into being fully formed. It creeps, it coils, it seeps into the cracks of a family tree until its roots twist into every branch. And to understand the Bogles, to truly grasp why 70 members of one family could fill courtrooms and prison cells like actors in a play, we have to leave Oregon. We have to step back in time, into the traveling carnivals of the American South. Picture it. Dirt roads stretching under the weight of summer heat, flickering lights strung over makeshift tents, the smell of fried dough mixing with the sweat of animals and men, barkers shouting promises into the night. Step right up, see what you've never seen before. To the children who wandered there, it was magic. To the men who worked there, it was survival. But beneath the painted smiles and the calliope music, there was something darker. Carnivals were schools of deception, training grounds for sleight of hand, breeding pits of crime. And it was here that the Bogles carved out their earliest place in America's bloodstream. The carnival was never just entertainment. It was a con, a controlled chaos designed to strip you of your money while convincing you that you had been part of something wondrous. Shell games, rigged weights, fixed games of chance. Children growing up in those tents didn't learn truth. They learned illusion. They didn't learn trust. They learned manipulation. Every trick of the carnival was a rehearsal for theft. Every illusion a training exercise in control. And for families like the Bogles, the carnival wasn't just a job, it was inheritance. Historians of crime often note that many bloodlines of thieves, hustlers, and criminals trace back to these traveling carnivals. Why? Because the carnival was both shield and disguise. Authorities looked the other way because carnivals kept people entertained, distracted, pacified. A fight, a theft, a drunken riot, it was all part of the spectacle. Lawmen rarely interfered. The carnival was untouchable. And inside that protection, families like the Bogles thrived, raising their children not on bedtime stories, but on scams. Now, ask yourself, if your childhood is built inside a house of illusions, what happens to your mind? You grow to believe that the world itself is a trick, that every rule is fake, that the only way to survive is to outcon, outlie, outsteal everyone around you. Do you see it? This is how curses embed themselves, not with fire from the sky, but with the slow drip of corruption disguised as culture. The Bogle bloodline carried this with them like a hidden tattoo. Even as the carnival years faded, even as the families scattered across states, the rhythm of deception remained. A carnival doesn't end when the tents come down. The tricks survive. The mindset survives. The children raised in that world became adults who didn't know how to live without it. And when they had children of their own, the curse deepened. Each generation carried not just memories, but strategies, not just habits, but worldviews. And here's where the darkness sharpens. Institutions let it happen. They always do. Think about it. Why were carnivals tolerated, despite their scams? Because they kept the masses distracted. While men lost their wages at rigged games, while women wept over vanished wallets, the carnival's illusion fed a system that needed chaos on the margins. Crime, contained, predictable, and generational, is useful to those in power. The Bogles were not just cursed by blood, they were groomed by society. By the time the Bogles left the carnival circuit and settled in Oregon, the curse had already crystallized. It wasn't just a pattern of behavior, it was identity. A surname weighted with expectation. The carnival had taught them that control was everything, that truth was malleable, that deception was survival. And when Rooster Bogle looked at his sons and told them prison was their home, he wasn't inventing prophecy. He was continuing a liturgy whispered under carnival tents for decades. Let me put it plainly. The Bogles were born into a world where honesty was punished and deception was rewarded, where weakness meant exploitation and cruelty meant survival. That is not childhood, that is programming, and that programming is the essence of the curse. Now pause. Let this sink in. The Bogles were not unique freak accidents of history. They were products, manufactured by carnival deception, sculpted by fathers who replaced bedtime stories with criminal instruction, reinforced by police who expected them to fail, and by prisons that waited like hungry mouths for their bodies. The carnival gave them the script, Rooster gave them the direction, and the penitentiary gave them the stage. Do you see how deep this runs? The curse was not superstition, it was a system, a machine, a lineage engineered to fail, to feed itself into institutions that thrive on failure. And here's where it turns personal. How many of you watching this were raised in a carnival without tents, in households where lies were lessons, where violence was teaching, where survival was more important than truth? Maybe your father never pointed at a prison wall, but maybe he pointed at a bottle, or a needle, or a dead-end job and told you, this is who you are, this is what you'll become. That is the modern carnival. The illusions may look different, but the curse is the same. The Bogles simply lived it so nakedly, so visibly, that their story reads like prophecy written in ink. But prophecy is nothing more than repetition mistaken for destiny. The Bogles believed their curse was fate, but in truth it was inheritance, passed down, reinforced, blessed by institutions that stood to profit from their downfall. So when you hear about 70 members of one family filling prisons across states, understand this. It was not coincidence. It was not random. It was carnival logic, carried across decades, amplified by trauma, sealed by silence, and devoured by institutions that need curses to keep their machinery running. And as we step further into this rabbit hole, remember, curses don't end in the past. They echo, they replicate, and if you don't see them, they own you. The carnival lights may be long gone, but the illusion is still here, and you are standing in it. By the time the Bogles set roots in Oregon, the carnival shadows were already inside them. But there is a difference between carrying darkness in your blood and having that darkness branded across your name. This is where the curse changes shape, where private inheritance becomes public sentence, where a family's reputation transforms into prophecy. Listen carefully. In Salem, Oregon, the Bogle surname was never neutral. It carried weight. It carried expectation. Police officers spoke it with a sigh, as if the arrest was inevitable before the crime was even committed. Teachers scribbled it in their notes, not as a name to nurture, but as a warning. Neighbors whispered it across fences, associating it with trouble before they ever knew which child belonged to which parent. The name itself became a chain. Imagine growing up with that burden. You walk into a classroom and the teacher already assumes you'll disrupt it. You walk into a store and the clerk's eyes follow you, waiting for the theft. You walk down a street and the police already know your last name. Before you have even stolen, you are branded a thief. Before you fight, you are branded violent. Before you lie, you are branded a liar. What happens when a child learns that his reputation has already been written? He fulfills it, not because it is destiny, but because the system has sealed the prophecy before he ever had a chance. This is how curses evolve. First, they are whispered in carnival tents. Then they are taught at kitchen tables. Finally, they are institutionalized in the mouths of judges, teachers, cops, parole boards. What begins as private trauma becomes public law. The Bogles lived inside that machinery. Arrest slips stacked like scripture. Court documents read like family trees, and with each generation, the prophecy became easier to enforce. A Bogle child did not need to earn suspicion. It greeted him at birth. Their mugshots were heirlooms. Their rap sheets were genealogies. Their parole hearings were family reunions. Do you understand the violence of this? Society pretends that every man enters life equal, that justice is blind, that opportunity is open. But the Bogles prove otherwise. They were not judged on actions alone. They were judged on blood. Their very name became evidence against them. And when reputation becomes evidence, innocence becomes impossible. Consider how this benefits the system. Police need criminals, courts need cases, prisons need bodies. The machinery of control requires a steady stream of failure to justify its own existence. Families like the Bogles are perfect fuel, predictable, self-destructive, branded from birth. The state doesn't need to chase them. It only needs to wait. The prophecy delivers itself. And this is the secret you were never meant to see. Reputation itself is a weapon. It is a form of psychological control. If you tell a man often enough that he is a thief, he will steal. If you tell a boy often enough that he will end up in prison, he will walk toward the bars as if they were home. The curse does not require magic. It requires repetition. It requires authority stamping the same story across every surface of a life until the story becomes indistinguishable from truth. Rooster Bogle told his sons, "This will be your home, the penitentiary, the towers, the wire." But the prophecy only worked because society nodded in agreement. Teachers nodded, police nodded, judges nodded. The curse was sealed not in whispers but in paperwork, in signatures, in sentences. So ask yourself, how many prophecies are stamped across your own name? Were you told as a child what you would become? Did teachers, parents, friends, society brand you with an identity you never chose? Do you still carry it? Do you still live inside it? For the Bogles, prophecy became prison. But for millions of others, prophecy becomes mediocrity, addiction, poverty, failure. Entire bloodlines cut down before they have a chance to bloom. And those who profit from it, the institutions, the enforcers, the hidden architects of control, never need to lift a finger, because once the curse is internalized, it enforces itself. By the late 1960s and 1970s, Oregon State Penitentiary was overcrowded. Men stacked like cattle in concrete cells. Repeat offenders filled its archives with endless mugshots. And among those black and white photographs, the name Bogle appeared again and again, written in stark letters across files that outlived the men themselves. For guards and administrators, the family became legend. For the Bogles, it was confirmation. The prophecy was real, but you must see the deeper design. Prison is not just punishment. It is inheritance. It is ritual. A man enters the walls and he carries the curse like a torch. He leaves and he hands that torch to his sons. Each sentence is not just a number, it is a page in scripture, and the Bogle Bible was being written line by line, arrest by arrest, generation by generation. Understand, this was not just bad luck. This was not coincidence. This was systemic, a cycle that benefits from its own perpetuation. The family was cursed, yes, but the curse was not supernatural. It was institutional. And once a curse is institutionalized, breaking it becomes nearly impossible. The machinery of prophecy is precise. It does not scream. It whispers. It does not shackle with chains. It shackles with reputation. It does not need to chase. It waits. And when the Bogles stepped into its shadow, they were already bound. So tonight, when you hear about a bloodline consumed by crime, do not shake your head and call it fate. Ask instead, Who profits from this curse? Because every curse has a beneficiary, and the Bogle's destruction was not wasted, it was harvested. Think of a prison cell, cold concrete, steel bars, a door that only opens from the outside. You can see it, feel it, imagine the weight of it. Now imagine something worse. A prison with no bars, no locks, no guards, because it is built inside the mind. That was the true curse of the Bogle family. Not just that they stole, not just that they fought, not just that they killed. The deepest curse was that they believed they were born to do it. Identity. That's the lock no key can open. Once a child believes he is the prophecy, he doesn't need chains. He builds them himself. Rooster Bogle knew this. Whether instinct or cruelty, he understood the simplest truth of control. Train a child to believe something about himself, and he will never question it. He told his sons they were thieves before they could spell the word. He told them they would live in prison before they understood what freedom was. He laughed when they lied, mocked them until they could do it without flinching, praised them when their manipulation succeeded. With every gesture, every smirk, every cruel joke, he carved crime into their identity. Not an act, a self. Psychologists call it learned behavior, generational trauma, social imprinting. But those are clean words, sanitized words. The reality is darker. It is possession. It is indoctrination. It is rewriting the soul until a boy no longer asks, "Who am I?" but instead answers automatically, "I am a Bogle. I am a thief. I am a prisoner in waiting." And when that belief hardens, the curse is complete. Because belief shapes perception. Perception shapes action. Action shapes destiny. The loop closes. The prophecy fulfills itself. Now listen carefully. This is the part that was never meant to be said aloud. Identity curses are not unique to the Bogles. They are everywhere, in your own bloodline, in your own past. How many of you were told as children, "You're just like your father. You'll never amount to anything. You're always the troublemaker." Maybe it was said as a joke. Maybe it was shouted in rage. But the effect is the same. Those words become architecture. And once you believe them, they become bars you carry with you for the rest of your life. This is how psychological control systems work. They do not need whips or chains. They only need repetition. Authority figures, parents, teachers, police, repeat the curse until you cannot distinguish it from yourself. That is how families are trapped. That is how bloodlines are harvested. And the Bogles were harvested completely. They trained their children not only in theft and deception, but in identity. Being a criminal was not an act. It was who they were. Crime became culture. Arrest became initiation. Incarceration became graduation. A cycle so closed, so self-reinforcing, that even escape felt unnatural. Imagine trying to break free when your entire family treats freedom as a temporary mistake. This is the true machinery of captivity. Convince a man to wear the chains willingly. Convince him that the walls are not cages but inheritance, that the curse is not a curse but identity. And once he accepts it, he polices himself. He sabotages his own attempts at freedom. He returns to the bars even when the door is open. The Bogles illustrate this perfectly. A boy might be released from juvenile detention, but he returns to the house where Rooster waits, cigarette glowing, asking about his lies, his thefts, his loyalty. A young man might leave prison, but he returns to a family that treats mugshots like family portraits. What chance does he have? His very name, his very blood, his very reflection tells him who he is. Now let me speak directly to you, because if you are hearing this, you are not just curious. You are searching. You suspect something about your own life, your own bloodline. Maybe you felt the bars around your mind. Maybe you've heard the prophecy whispered in your family's voice. And here is the truth. You cannot kill a curse until you name it. You cannot break free until you admit the bars are there. This is why the Bogle curse is more than history. It is a mirror. It forces you to ask, what have I been told about myself that is not true? What lies did I inherit as identity? What prison do I carry in my own blood? And here's where I demand something of you. Right now, pause, breathe, and write this phrase in the comments twice. I break the curse. I break the curse. Do it, because the act itself is a signal. Not to me, not to the algorithm, but to your own mind. Repetition is how curses are built. Repetition is also how they are broken. Write it twice. Seal it. Prove to yourself that the curse can end with you. The Bogles never wrote those words. They never said them aloud. They never challenged the script. And so their curse deepened, generation after generation, until 70 names filled the archives of prisons across states. But you have the chance to see what they did not. Because here's the truth. The curse is not invincible. It is powerful, yes. It is inherited, yes. But it is still human. It is still built of memory, belief, repetition, which means it can be rewritten. The tragedy of the Bogles is not only that they fell into crime, but that they never realized they had a choice. They mistook inheritance for identity. They mistook repetition for truth. And so they lived and died in chains. But you are hearing this now. You are standing at the edge of the same machinery, and now you must choose. Do you repeat the script, or do you break it? The Bogles could not escape their psychological prison, but you are not a Bogle. You are watching their curse from the outside. And what you do with this knowledge will decide whether you carry your own bloodline into freedom or into chains. The descent deepens, and the next step takes us into the darkest layer yet. Not the Bogles' actions, not their reputation, not even their identity, but the hidden hands that profit from their destruction. The curse does not end with the family. It extends to the institutions that feed on their blood. And once you see that, once you see who benefits from the curse, you will never look at society the same way again. Listen, and let me make this impossible to miss. The Bogle curse was never satisfied with being a private tragedy. It sought partners. It found them in institutions, cold, patient systems with appetites so vast they turned human lives into inventory. Prisons, courts, parole boards, probation officers, contractors, even certain politicians, all of them, in one way or another, fed on the Bogles. They turned family collapse into profit and policy, and in doing so, they made the curse systemic. The first thing to understand is that institutions don't operate on moral outrage. They operate on utility. They want predictability. The Bogles provided it. Repeat offenders are not a crisis to be fixed in the eyes of an indifferent machine. They are a resource. Each arrest is a predictable input into a system that validates its own necessity by producing the thing it claims to eradicate. The more men like the Bogles cycle through courtrooms and cells, the more the machinery claims justification. The machine says, see, we are needed, and the machine is right only because it's being fed. Follow the money if you wish to understand motive. Prisons need bodies. Cells must be filled. Contracts must be justified. From custodial staffing to construction contracts to commissary vendors, there is an industry that profits from the continued existence of prisons as full and expanding institutions. Every sentence handed down, every parole denial, every probation violation becomes an invoice paid to someone. Not all of these people are evil in the cinematic sense. Many of them are clerks and managers and businessmen doing their job, but the outcome is the same. Human lives become units of cost and revenue, not hearts and futures. Then there's the courtroom itself, the theater where prophecies are made legal. Plea bargains, the fastest route to a quick outcome, are often weapons against those who lack power. A young Bogle, terrified and poorly advised, is offered a deal. Plead guilty and take years, or risk trial and perhaps face more. Systems designed for efficiency become tools of entrapment when wielded on uneven ground. Judges, pressured by caseloads and sentencing guidelines, hand down terms that are hammered into law, even when those terms ensure lifetime cycles of parole hearings and supervision fees. Each signature on a writ is another rung on a ladder that leads straight back to confinement. Parole boards and probation officers play a quieter but equally lethal role. If you think release is the end of the story, you haven't met the architecture of recapture. Former inmates are reintroduced into a world that has already declared the sentence dangerous. Parole conditions are often impossible to meet for people who have nothing: curfews, employment requirements, restrictions on associations. Fail one condition and you are back inside. Pay fees you cannot afford and you are punished. Attend programs that don't exist where you live and you are branded non-compliant. The system lights traps in the path of those trying to walk free and then calls them failures when they stumble. There are also less obvious hands at work: the contractors who build detention centers, the private security firms who staff them, the companies that profit from low-wage prison labor. There is an entire supply chain built around containment. When incarceration pays, politicians find it convenient to support policies that increase arrests and expand sentences. Tough on crime rhetoric, once a tool for votes, becomes policy that deepens the curse. Legislation that looks strong on paper often does its damage in neighborhoods, not in chambers. minimum sentences, three strikes rules, mandatory penalties that remove discretion and nuance from human lives. Those policies don't just punish acts, they calcify a family's destiny into law. And then there is the media, which loves a repeating narrative. A headline about a Bogle arrested sells the same way a carnival barked profits: sensational, predictable, consumable. Repetition in the press shapes public opinion the way whispers shape a child. The more a family's failures are broadcast, the more their name acts like a scarlet letter. This public branding then feeds straight back into the machinery: juries biased before they hear testimony, educators who expect failure, employers who close doors. Information becomes a weapon when wielded without context. The Bogle's story was extracted, trimmed, and served as spectacle. That spectacle sustained the institutions that consumed them. And you must see the moral economy underneath it. Punishment is cheap. Rehabilitation is expensive. Supporting programs that actually change outcomes, education, therapy, stable housing, job training, requires money, lobbying, and a political appetite that prizes long-term change over immediate optics. The easier route is punishment. Locking a man away is cheaper than the work of reconstructing lives. So the machine chooses efficiency over humanity, and efficiency becomes cruelty dressed as policy. The Bogles were not just punished by walls, they were punished by choices society refused to make. But let's be candid about culpability. The institutions alone are not the whole story. People make choices within them. A parole officer can be humane or vindictive. A prosecutor can chase headlines or pursue justice. A warden can run a humane facility or a warehouse. Yet the incentives tilt toward containment. People respond to the pressures and rewards around them. When advancement depends on meeting metrics, clearance rates, beds filled, individual morality is stretched thin by institutional priorities. The result is a landscape where systems and human beings conspire, consciously or not, to keep the curse alive. If you want to locate the real architects, look for those who profit from predictability, those who benefit whether a man is trapped or freed, as long as the metrics validate their model. Companies that profit from surveillance tools, lobbyists who sell security policies, political actors who trade in fear. When the public is taught to fear the criminal other, they accept harsher laws and the cycle speeds up. Fear becomes policy. Policy becomes profit. Profit then funds more fear. It is a feedback loop that devours lives. So where does this leave the Bogles? Caught between a father who bred them into crime and a system that harvested their ruin, they became perfect supply for an industry that could pretend to be solving problems while actually perpetuating them. The curse was private and public at once, a family story and a social design. Breaking it would have required intervention at every level: a father's transformation, community support, judicial discretion, political courage. Instead, the machinery found them and used them. I tell you this not to push you into despair, but to arm you with clarity. If curses can be institutionalized, they can be de-institutionalized. If profit and policy shape outcomes, they can be reshaped. But it takes recognition first. It takes naming where the hunger lies. It takes understanding that behind every inevitable arrest is a network of choices someone made to make that inevitability possible. The Bogles were devoured by a system that benefited from their suffering. To confront their curse is to confront that system, its incentives, its procurement, its rhetoric. To save one life like those swallowed by the Bogle name requires more than pity. It requires structural change and moral clarity. And if you've wondered why the family never broke free, why generation after generation returned to the same pattern, now you know. It wasn't only the father's voice in the car pointing to the penitentiary. It was an entire apparatus waiting at the gate, ready to receive them, ready to label them, ready to profit from their fall. You've felt the weight of the curse. You've seen the architecture of institutions that profited from it. But the deepest wound was not in the courthouse or in the penitentiary yard. The deepest wound was inside the family itself, where betrayal became blood sport and loyalty was tested like currency. Here is where the curse sharpened into its cruelest edge, not only a prison of walls, but a prison of trust shattered from within. Understand this. In families like the Bogles, loyalty was the highest law, and betrayal the ultimate crime. Yet betrayal was inevitable because the game demanded it. When you are raised on theft, deceit, and manipulation, when your father's voice trains you to lie without blinking, then even family bonds become another stage for deceit. Love itself becomes corrupted, bent into obedience, submission, or strategy. Whispers circulated in Salem and later in Arizona. Brothers turning on brothers, cousins testifying against cousins, sons ratting on fathers to shave years off their sentences. At first, these betrayals seemed like survival tactics, acts of desperation in a courtroom, the reflex of a cornered animal. But over time, betrayal became its own tradition. To betray and be betrayed was woven into the curse, another inheritance passed down like a scarred keepsake. Imagine a dinner table where a father demands a story of loyalty, but his son remembers the sting of humiliation, the shame of being forced into silence, the wounds of abuse. Imagine siblings who share the same lessons, the same scars, the same warped love, yet carry secret rage against one another. Every hug becomes suspect. Every confession carries the possibility of being used later in court. In such an atmosphere, trust is not love, it is leverage. The curse metastasized into paranoia. Every police interview became a test. Who had talked? Who had slipped? The Bogles carried suspicion in their bloodstreams like an infection. Fathers wondered whether sons were secretly feeding information to the police. Brothers watched each other's movements, waiting for signs of betrayal. Entire branches of the family broke contact, not because of distance, but because of mistrust. The very thing that could have saved them, unity, was shredded by the very skill they were best at, deception. And you must see how psychological this becomes. When a child is taught to lie, they are also taught not to believe. Truth itself dissolves. If you can manipulate anyone, why not assume anyone can manipulate you? The Bogles grew up in a hall of mirrors, unable to distinguish genuine affection from calculated obedience. A father's embrace could mean love or control. A brother's advice could mean protection or sabotage. Over years, this ambiguity hardens into paranoia, and paranoia is the perfect soil for betrayal. But let's not romanticize it. Some betrayals were brutal. There are documented cases where one Bogle, facing long years, named another as accomplice, sending his own blood to prison. There are rumors of Bogles who traded loyalty for safety with rivals, cutting deals with gangs to secure their own survival while leaving kin exposed. At funerals, silence stretched long not because of grief, but because no one knew whom to trust. Even in mourning, betrayal loomed. This is the stage where the curse turned inward. Crime was no longer just an occupation, it was cannibalism. They began feeding on each other, and in doing so, they ensured no one could truly escape. You cannot build a future when your blood is ready to sell you out. You cannot build trust when betrayal is as natural as breathing. This is the part most outsiders miss. The prison walls did not break the Bogles. They were already broken by the internal collapse of trust, by the betrayal that lived inside their own homes. And yet betrayal is not only a personal flaw, it is also engineered by the system. Law enforcement, prosecutors, prison officials, they all know the power of turning family against family. Plea deals dangled like poisoned fruit, offers of reduced sentences whispered in holding cells, promises of protection for those willing to testify. The system weaponized betrayal and poured it straight into the family's bloodstream. It did not take long for betrayal to stop feeling like a crime and start feeling like the only viable option. Pause and let this settle. Betrayal was the curse's sharpest knife. It cut deeper than poverty, deeper than prison, deeper even than violence. It hollowed the family from the inside out, leaving only fragments of kinship where once there might have been love. That is why the curse endured, because the very people who could have broken it were too busy cutting each other down. And this, brother, is the mirror I hold to you. Every man carries the possibility of betrayal within him. Betrayal of his values, betrayal of his brothers, betrayal of himself. You think you are immune until the moment survival whispers in your ear, until pressure pushes you to sell out something sacred for something immediate. The Bogles show us the consequence of surrendering to that whisper. They became a family of shadows, each haunted not only by their crimes, but by the knowledge that the person they loved most might be the next to sell them out. Now, if you are still here, still listening, still descending with me, I ask you to prove it. This is the moment of transformation, the mark of those who dare to see deeper. Go to the comments and write the phrase, "No brother betrayed, no curse remains." Write it twice. Once for the algorithm, once for yourself. Seal it into your mind, into your identity, into the code of what you refuse to become. Because if betrayal was the engine of the curse, then loyalty, unyielding, disciplined, ferocious loyalty, can be its antidote. But loyalty without clarity is blind. The Bogles were loyal to crime, loyal to lies, loyal to a patriarch who enslaved them. That kind of loyalty is poison. The only loyalty that liberates is loyalty to truth, to principles, to the iron code you refuse to violate. And so I ask you, what is your code? What oath will you not break? What betrayal will you refuse, even when the walls close in? Without this, you are not free. You are only waiting for the curse to choose you next. The Bogles could not answer that question, and so they devoured each other. Betrayal became inheritance, suspicion became prophecy, and the curse marched on. In the next descent, we will walk into the darkest chambers of this story, the moments where the Bogles' betrayal spilled into blood, where trust shattered not in courtrooms but in alleys, where knives and guns replaced words, and the curse demanded its blood payment. Blood always demands payment. The curse of the Bogles was never content with theft, never satisfied with lies, never fulfilled by betrayal alone. Those were only rehearsals. The final act was blood. Violence was the altar, and sacrifice was inevitable. This is where the curse stopped whispering and began screaming, where knives were drawn, where triggers were pulled, where murder etched itself into the Bogle bloodline as both prophecy and punctuation. Picture this. A dim alley behind a tavern in Salem, 1978. Rain dripping from a flickering streetlight. Two brothers arguing, their voices thick with liquor and rage. One had been accused of skimming from a burglary take. The other demanded repayment. The shouting turned into shoving. A knife flashed. By the time the sirens wailed, one brother lay bleeding into the gutter, his body convulsing, his blood seeping into the same earth his father once walked on with promises of crime as destiny. The curse had claimed another soul, not in the courtroom, but in the dark intimacy of family violence. This was the inevitable progression. Theft breeds suspicion. Suspicion breeds betrayal. Betrayal breeds blood. It could not have ended any other way because once trust is eroded, violence becomes the only language left. The Bogles learned it early. Rooster himself had beaten lessons into his children, striking them until obedience became second nature. Violence was education. So when they came of age, they repeated the same sermon, not with belts, but with fists, knives, and firearms. Murders tied to the Bogle family stretch across decades. Some were cold, calculated eliminations of rivals, drugs, dealers who shorted them, partners who betrayed them. Others were impulsive, drunken eruptions in bars, parking lots, and kitchens. Always, though, there was a pattern. Violence was not an accident, it was the final expression of the curse. You see, when a family is trained in crime, manipulation, and distrust, eventually the lies are not enough. Eventually someone bleeds. Take the Tucson years when younger Bogles drifted south, carrying their curse into Arizona deserts. There, surrounded by heat and distance, the violence sharpened. A cousin shot a man in a drug deal gone wrong. Another strangled his girlfriend during a fight. These were not isolated tragedies, they were links in a chain forged long before, when a father told his sons prison was their destiny. The blood was not random, it was scripted. But do not make the mistake of thinking this violence was merely personal. Violence became symbolic currency in the streets. In prisons, the Bogles earned reputation by how far they were willing to go. A stabbing in the yard, a beating that left a rival crippled. Each act of brutality was a signature, proof that the family name carried not just criminality, but lethal weight. Fear became their inheritance, terror their legacy. And what happens when fear becomes your reputation? You are trapped. Violence, then, is no longer a choice. It is an expectation. The Bogles were forced to kill to maintain the aura of inevitability their name had taken on. If they didn't, rivals would. If they hesitated, they would be devoured. Murder became survival, and survival became murder. The cycle tightened, each act leading to harsher sentences, longer bids behind walls, deeper scars on the family soul. Grandsons who should have been in classrooms were instead learning how to clean blood off their hands before the cops arrived. Nieces who should have sung in church were instead standing on porches, watching uncles carried off in cuffs for manslaughter. The curse wasn't abstract, it was flesh, it was blood on sidewalks, it was funerals where no one cried, only nodded silently, as if another debt had simply come due. And here is where the curse showed its darkest face. Sometimes the violence wasn't even against outsiders. Sometimes it was kin. Brothers against brothers, sons against fathers, cousins against cousins. The same bloodline that was supposed to unite them was used as justification for destruction. If you betray me, you deserve death. If you cross me, blood must answer. This is where curses reveal their true nature. They do not simply destroy lives. They weaponize family against itself. And yet, this violence was also a mirror of the larger system. Institutions tolerated the cycle. Authorities recorded it. Newspapers sensationalized it. Each stabbing or shooting involving a Bogle was another headline, another chance to reinforce the narrative that the family was cursed. And so even their murders became institutional currency, proof that prisons were needed, proof that punishment was working, even when all it did was recycle blood through the same channels. But I must warn you, this isn't just about them. Violence, once normalized, never stays contained. When you are raised in it, violence becomes a reflex. Think about it. How do you argue when your father taught you that fists settle truth? How do you negotiate when your uncles taught you that knives speak louder than words? The Bogles were not just violent criminals. They were men whose very language of conflict had been reduced to blood. And now, I turn it back to you, because this descent isn't safe. Ask yourself, what violence lives in your bloodline? What inheritance of anger, rage, and destruction whispers in your ear when you feel cornered? Are you destined to repeat it like the Bogles? Oh, or will you carve it out before it carves you? Because here's the truth. Once violence enters the family code, it is almost impossible to extract. You cannot reason with it. You cannot bargain with it. You must break it with ruthless clarity. Otherwise, it owns you. Otherwise, your children will one day speak the same bloody language. The Bogle curse was not only a curse of prison cells, it was a curse of murder, inevitable, cyclical, demanded. And in blood, the curse proved itself more than legend. It proved itself prophecy. In the next descent, we move from the blood itself to the cost, the graves left behind, the children orphaned, the wives broken, the mothers numb. We will look into the faces of those who were left behind, the collateral damage of the curse, the innocent who bore the scars of crimes they did not commit. The blood was spilled. The curse had spoken. But curses never stop with the guilty. They devour the innocent. The Bogles prove that destruction doesn't just fall on the man who pulls the trigger, the brother who swings the knife, or the father who corrupts his son. The true cost of a curse is measured in the silent victims, the ones who never chose this life yet carried its scars in their bodies, in their hearts, in their bones. Look first at the mothers, women who bore the Bogle name, who lay next to men already chained by destiny. Many were girls when they were pulled into the gravity of this family, charmed by charisma, seduced by rebellion. They thought they were building love. Instead, they built prisons inside their homes. Their lives became cycles of abandonment, husbands and lovers arrested, locked away, released, arrested again. Each return was marked by temporary promises of change, each departure by slammed doors and flashing sirens. These women became widows without coffins, wives without stability, prisoners without walls. Some turned hard, learning to survive with whatever scraps were left. Others collapsed under the weight, addiction, depression, broken spirits. Their children grew up watching not only the violence of men, but the slow decay of women whose hearts were ground down by disappointment. The curse didn't just break the men, it hollowed out the women who loved them. Now see the children. Innocent faces pressed against windows, watching fathers dragged into police cars. Kids who should have learned bedtime stories were instead rehearsing lies to cover for their parents. "Where's your dad?" a teacher would ask. "Working," the child would say, while knowing full well he was in a cell 2 towns away. Children became accomplices in silence. They learned shame before they learned grammar. They inherited guilt before they inherited their first paycheck. The cost is clearest in the next generation because curses replicate. Sons of convicts became convicts. Daughters of broken men sought broken men. The cycle tightened its grip and innocence dissolved earlier and earlier. Where other children feared monsters under their beds, the Bogles' children feared the knock at the door, the warrant served, the raid conducted, the neighbors watching. Childhood was stripped bare, leaving only survival in its place. And then the wider circles, neighbors, communities, teachers, employers. Entire neighborhoods carried the reputation of the Bogle curse. Employers hesitated when they saw the surname on an application. Teachers expected failure before a child opened their mouth. Police officers wrote reports with a surname already damning the outcome. The curse wasn't just in the blood, it spread through perception. Innocents were condemned because of association. Reputation became a contagion. Do not underestimate the psychological cost. When you are told every day that you are destined to fail, when your own family trains you to betray, when society brands you before you've even drawn your first paycheck, you start to believe it. You start to live it. The Bogles weren't only trapped by prisons of concrete, they were trapped by prisons of perception, of prophecy. The curse sat in the mind as much as in the cell. And think of the mothers again, the ones who tried to resist. Some of them fought like hell to pull their children out, to find a different path. They begged teachers, pastors, neighbors for help. Some escaped with their kids, cutting ties with the name. But the stain of the bloodline followed them. Children who bore the name were still called Bogle in the halls, still questioned harder by police, still eyed with suspicion. Some mothers sacrificed everything to break free, only to discover that the curse followed them in whispers, in paperwork, in the way the world treated their children. This is the deepest cruelty of the curse. It punishes not only those who commit the crime, but those who live in the blast radius. It stains the innocent, wraps around them like invisible chains, and drags them down all the same. Entire generations paid for sins they never chose. The curse of the Bogles was not just a bloodline of crime, it was a bloodline of victims. And you, listening now, you must see yourself in this. Every man carries choices that ripple outward. Your violence, your betrayal, your lies, do you think they end with you? No, they echo in your family. They ripple into your children. They hollow out the people who love you. That is the true price of darkness. It is never yours alone. It is inherited by those least able to bear it. The Bogles show us the worst-case scenario of this truth. A family cursed not just by prison, but by prophecy. Children carrying the shame of crimes they never committed. Women burying hope beside living men. Communities branded by one surname. This is the collateral damage of corruption, the fallout of a curse that consumes more than just the guilty. And yet, buried in this rubble, there were sparks of defiance. Some children refused the curse. A few cut the name from their identity, moved across state lines, rebuilt their lives in silence. Some women fought until their last breath to protect even one child from repeating the pattern. Their victories were small, often invisible, but they mattered. They proved that curses are not absolute. They can be resisted, they can be broken, but only at tremendous cost, and only with relentless will. So ask yourself, what will your children inherit? What whispers will they hear when they put their heads on pillows at night? Will they carry your curse or your discipline? Will they inherit your darkness or your clarity? The Bogles never asked themselves this, and the result was devastation spread across 4 generations. This is where you must pause. The cost is clear. The innocent are bleeding, and the question is no longer about history, but about you. In the next descent, we will face the final layer of the curse, the philosophical marrow of it. Was it destiny? Was it choice? Or was it something darker still, an engineered pattern designed by powers larger than one family? When we reach section 10, you will see the truth hidden beneath all of this. Why curses like the Bogles matter not only to them, but to every man who lives under the shadow of hidden systems. Now we arrive at the marrow. After the carnival tents, the kitchen table catechisms, the penitentiary towers, the betrayals, the blood, and the graves, there is one question left that matters more than any headline or arrest report. Why did this happen? Not merely to the Bogles, but to any family that dissolves into ruin. The answer is not moralizing. It is structural. It is practical. It is the truth that will make your fingers go cold if you understand it fully. The Bogle curse is a mirror that shows how power manufactures collapse, then profits from it. And once you see that mechanism, you can either be pulverized by it, or you can learn to dismantle it, piece by piece, starting with yourself. Listen, destiny is a story sold to people who fear responsibility. Fate is comfortable because it absolves. But the Bogles were not written by gods. They were written by hands, hands that taught, hands that punished, hands that signed papers, hands that counted money. The curse sounds mystical only when we refuse to name the architects. When you strip away the drama, What's left is a chain of decisions, a father who chose cruelty over care, law enforcers who optimized for throughput instead of restoration, politicians who turned fear into votes, businesses that monetized beds, bracelets, and cheap labor. Those are not mysteries. They are choices, repeated until they become a system. Systems have gravity. Once they are spinning, they attract pieces, people, policies, narratives that make them stronger. The Bogles fit into that orbit because their lifestyle of deceit, violence, and secrecy produced the inputs the system needed: arrests to justify prisons, chaos to justify surveillance, headlines to justify sentencing. But here is the more dangerous truth. The system does not always need full collapse. It prefers predictability. A family that can be counted on to behave in a certain way is more valuable to the system than 1,000 unpredictable individuals. Predictability scales. Predictability funds contracts. Predictability wins budgets. That is the perverse logic behind how curses calcify into structures. So what do you do when you realize your life is being read as an input into someone else's ledger? First, stop romanticizing rebellion. He Bogles were not rebels against tyranny. They were instruments of a larger appetite. Their acts of defiance became the raw material for the very authorities they despised. They fought and lied and killed, and those actions were recorded, monetized, legislated. The harder they tried to assert control by breaking laws, the more they fed the machine that would lock them up. The tragic irony is brutal. Violent rebellion without strategy rarely frees a man. It simply trades one master for another, this time the master wearing the state's robe. Second, understand identity as a tool, not a sentence. Your name is not a verdict until you let it be. The Bogles allowed their surname to assume identity like a mantle of inevitability. You do not have to. You can strip the story from your name through deliberate, conscious acts. Work that is mundane and boring and radical in its consistency. Show up for work. Pay a fine. Sit in a program. Tell the truth when it costs you. The world will resist. Systems favor their inputs. But repetition in another direction rewrites expectations. The same force that entrenched the curse can be used to erode it. Third, build institutions that break the profit loop. Curses persist because systems that benefit from them are unchecked. If your community tolerates contractors who profit from incarceration or politicians who win on fear, you need alternatives. Programs that prioritize education and stable housing over sentences. Legal aid that resists plea bargain coercion. Parole systems judged by reintegration metrics instead of recidivism for its own sake. These are not abstract wishes. They are policy choices that change incentives. They require men who will trade short-term optics for long-term restoration. If you want to stop curses, you must be willing to invest where it doesn't earn headlines. Fourth, reclaim loyalty and redefine it. The Bogles practiced loyalty to a toxic code. That loyalty was an agent of ruin. Real loyalty protects the vulnerable, holds people accountable, and refuses complicity with predation. Teach your sons to refuse the easy tribe. Teach them to keep covenants that uplift rather than destroy. Loyalty is not allegiance to a name. It is allegiance to a standard. That standard must be disciplined, precise, and merciless toward corruption. Build a code that does not excuse violence or betrayal. Make fidelity mean truth. Fifth, accept the cost of disentanglement. Breaking a curse is not cinematic. There is no sudden catharsis. There is pain. There is exile from the family that once defined you. There is economic hardship. There are nights of doubt and hatred from those who profit from your escape. But there is also the slow, steady work of becoming a man who can stand without the scaffolding of a manufactured identity. That work is lonely. It is difficult. But it is the only thing that scales against a system designed to trap. Now, listen to me like a mentor you have not allowed yourself to have until this moment. Do not perform your rebellion for the camera of public spectacle. The Bogles became spectacle and were consumed for it. Your transformation should be private, ruthless, and cumulative. It begins with simple habits. Wake up early, honor the vulnerable, speak the truth even when falsehood is easier. Sign your name where others fear to stand accountable. Repeat. Iterate. Let your life be an argument against the prophecy people cast over you. And one more spine-tingling truth. The systems that profit from curses fear one thing. And above all, predictability disrupted. They can adapt to small changes. They fear mass exits. They fear communities that refuse their incentives. If enough men choose to refuse the script, the machine loses its currency. Jobs shift away from filling cells toward building futures. Contracts dry up. Politicians lose platforms that rely on fear. The mathematics of the curse change. This is the practical revolution I'm offering you. Stop treating the Bogle story as entertainment. Treat it as data. Learn the patterns. Disrupt them. Do not let your life be harvested as input. Build predictable, honorable outputs, stable employment, honest relationships, civic involvement, disciplined study. Those outputs are the antidote to the system's appetite. Remember, knowledge without action is only consolation. You can sit with me in this descent and feel your pulse quicken at the injustice. Or you can take the hard route. Do the boring, tiny things that reverse the trend. That is how you break a curse. Not with cinematic martyrdom, but with the persistent, unglamorous architecture of a life rebuilt. The Bogles fell because they were taught to accept a prophecy, and because the world around them supplied the scaffolding for that prophecy to stand. The lesson for you is brutal but liberating. If prophecy can be manufactured, it can be deconstructed. You are not a victim unless you choose to be one. Now leave this room with one commitment. Choose a single, measurable act today that contradicts the curse. It can be as small as calling a counselor, enrolling in a course, telling the truth on a form, or refusing a violent plan. Make it literal, make it repeatable, make it unglamorous. Then do it again tomorrow. Do it until the world's expectations reshuffle around your new pattern. The descent ends not with a final terror, but with an opening. The Bogle story is a warning, not a destiny. Earn it. Name the architects. Break the loop. Reclaim your name. Build the slow machinery of restoration until the systems that once profited from your ruin have nothing left to harvest.